the threat, the existential threat to annihilate the Jewish people from the planet is as real today as it was in King Haman's times in ancient Persia, where we have a new King Haman in the form of Ahmadinejad, who in my opinion is a reincarnation of evil. King Haman became Adolf Hitler, became Ahmadinejad. Now you may say that that's an extremist statement, but that's because you are a fool and you don't know history. I have an astounding political article in my hand that came out today in the Atlantic magazine, where Fidel Castro tells a writer, send a message to Ahmadinejad of Iran, stop slandering the Jews. I was shocked by this. Fidel Castro was a dictator for over 40 years, a socialist, a lifetime socialist, a dictator in Cuba. And yet in this interview, Fidel says to the writer at the Atlantic, stop slandering the Jews, tell Ahmadinejad that. He said over the course of the first 5-hour discussion, Fidel Castro returned to his excoriation of anti-Semitism. He criticized Ahmadinejad for denying the Holocaust and explained why the Iranian government would better serve the cause of peace by acknowledging the unique history of anti-Semitism and trying to understand why Israelis fear for their existence. Now, I want to pause right here. I'm talking about a lifetime communist, a dictator, Fidel Castro. Even he recognizes that Ahmadinejad, unless he is stopped, will drag the entire world into a world war. So he writes, he began this discussion, meaning Castro, by describing his own first encounters with anti-Semitism as a small boy. This is Fidel Castro now. He said, I remember when I was a boy, a long time ago, when I was 5 or 6 years old, and I lived in the countryside. And I remember Good Friday. What was the atmosphere a child breathed? He said, well, people said, God is dead. Be quiet. God died every year between Thursday and Saturday of Holy Week, and it made a profound impression on everyone. What happened? They would say the Jews killed God. They blamed the Jews for killing God. Do you realize this, said Castro? He went on. Well, I didn't know what a Jew was. I knew of a bird that was called a Jew, and so for me the Jews were those birds. These birds had big noses. I don't even know why they were called that. That's what I remember. This is how ignorant the entire population was. Castro said the Iranian government should understand the consequences of theological anti-Semitism. This went on for maybe 2,000 years, said Castro. I don't think anyone has been slandered more than the Jews. I would say much more than the Muslims. They have been slandered much more than the Muslims, because the Jews are blamed and slandered for everything. No one blames the Muslims for anything, said Castro. I want to pause here. This is the dictator of Cuba saying these things. If only, let us say, Hillary Clinton, these words could go into Hillary Clinton's ears. He says, no one blames the Muslims for anything. And then he goes on and says, the Iranian government should understand that the Jews were expelled from their land, persecuted and mistreated all over the world, as the ones who killed God. In my judgment, here's what happened to them. Reverse selection. What's reverse selection? Over 2,000 years, they were subjected to terrible persecution, and then to the pogroms. One might have assumed that they would have disappeared. I think their culture and religion kept them together as a nation. He continued. The Jews have lived an existence that is much harder than ours. There is nothing that compares to the Holocaust. I asked him if he would tell Ahmadinejad what he was telling me. He said, I am saying this so you can communicate it, he answered. I think this is one of the most astounding interviews I've ever read in my life, especially since it comes from a lifetime socialist dictator named Fidel Castro. And so I say to you, that is why it's very important you understand what he said. Listen to what he said. Reverse selection has kept the Jewish people alive. What is reverse selection? He said, I think their culture and religion kept them together as a nation. Now let's pause at that juncture. Culture and religion kept them together as a nation. Let's take the opposite to the religious Jew, where the culture and religion are kept alive, to the Woody Allens and the Larry Davids of the world, the Hollywood crowd of Jews, let's say, who spit on their own religion, sneer at Christians, and basically have contempt for anything to do with God. You know it and I know it. They don't even understand that they are the end line of their own dissatisfaction with existence. They are the end of their existence. There's nothing to follow them. Perhaps that's the way they see it. But the people that some of you don't even understand, that you have maybe disrespect for or contempt, because they run around in black clothes and they follow absurd religious practices and They live in another universe. They are actually the tattered remnant of the ancestry. Now, that doesn't mean you have to respect them. It doesn't mean all of them are pure. It doesn't mean all of them are saintly. We know that's not true, but that's not the point. We're talking subjectively, but objectively, it is those in the black robes, in the black coats, whether it be in Judaism or Christianity, who keep the religions alive. And so today I say it's very important to recognize what we are talking about when we talk about the Jewish people. It's not the lawyer that you meet. It's not the Hollywood filmmaker that you may hate. It is not that.